Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in History Through Film. Today we're going to take a little detour from our Western civilizations and our gifts of the Greeks, Romans, French, and British, and we're going to see how the East and the West clash in something called the Crusades. In fact, we're really not going to study the Crusades per se, we're just going to set up for the Crusades. Because as we look at this unit, we spent some time on the Romans. We watched Gladiator. We did our Roman contributions walkabout. One of the things that comes out of the Roman Empire is Christianity. Though it's not created necessarily by the Romans, it's eventually promoted by the Romans, as you're about to find out. So that's our Western piece. We're going to throw in some Islam in here too, which is going to come from the East. So it's a little bit of a clash from our first unit and our second unit that results in something called the Crusades. So we've got two learning targets we're going to seek to answer here today. The first one says, describe how Jerusalem was and still is an important religious city. Compare and contrast the development of Christianity and Islam. And we're going to get a little snapshot of all of those things that we can use to answer those questions. So what will we learn? Again, we're going to look at the growth of Christianity. We'll certainly look at the Roman influence in that. We'll talk briefly about the development of Islam. We'll talk about the importance of Jerusalem, and we'll see how this leads to conflict, which is a time period that is called the Crusades. And you know, for those of you who are juniors and have studied this in your Middle Ages unit, this will be kind of a review for you, and seniors as well. If you're taking this course first semester as a junior, then you haven't learned about the rise of Christianity and the rise of Islam yet. But we like to make those connections to other classes, so it's not necessary that you have that information, but if you do, it might just enhance what you're about to learn here today. So let's start by talking about the growth of Christianity. First of all, again, we want to make this a connection to the Romans. Jesus lived and was crucified during the peak of Roman power. He was crucified because he was seen as a threat to the Romans, with the gathering crowds that would come to hear him speak, people calling him the Messiah, this king that they had been waiting for. The Romans didn't like that, and so they arrested him, and they killed him in one of the most gruesome ways possible, which is crucifixion. Well, you'd think an act like that would destroy a religion, given that the most important person that the followers look up to was beaten and nailed to a cross and humiliated in such a scandalous way and ultimately died. You'd think a lot of people would say, well, I don't want anything to do with that because I don't want to get crucified myself. But the opposite actually occurred. More and more people continue to flock to Christianity. So though their leader was killed, Christians still worshipped in secret, as Christianity was illegal for its first 300 years of its existence. And that's where this ichthys fish comes in. It was a symbol for Christians. They would put it, in the city somewhere, and people who saw it and knew what it meant knew that there was going to be a Christian worship later that night, though most people had no idea what it meant, so it was just a symbol to the followers that we are going to worship in secret. So the Jesus fish, as it's also called, the Jesus fish symbol, was a means by which Christians identified themselves as believers in a time of persecution. Christians could get harassed, could get bullied, certainly arrested and killed if you were just found out to be a Christian. So they had to come up with some other means of doing so. Now, again, Christianity continues to grow and spread, and the obvious question should be, why is that if people have to worship in secret and they know they can be killed? Well, of course, the appeal of Jesus is a pretty big part of that. He was peaceful, he was loving, his message of life after death in this kingdom of heaven was so appealing to people who had nothing in the Roman Empire and people who weren't really getting anything out of their Roman gods. And along comes Jesus, and his message just sounds so much more, lack of a better word, appealing to those who were living a very poor and desolate lifestyle. Many of them were in the Roman Empire. He was a commoner, so people could relate to him, and even his crucifixion. Obviously, those of you who are Christians know the saying is Jesus died for our sins, that he took sin upon his shoulder and went to the cross for it. So all these things about Jesus made him, a reason for people to continue to flock to Christianity. Of course, there were other followers, such as Peter and Paul, who spread his teachings, kept him relevant in a way, and continue to spread ideas to those who had never heard of Jesus. And when that happens, people convert, and more people become Christian. Another thing that helped Christianity grow was Roman roads. We talk a lot about this in world history. Thousands of miles of Roman roads were built for the Roman military, so the Romans could get anywhere within their empire quite quickly. Well, the byproduct of that is trade. When people use those roads, they bring ideas with them, and so Christians could travel on those roads and easily spread Christianity. The other thing that the Romans had was a common language, which was Latin, that allowed ideas to spread more easily. You can just think of this as people can communicate. You don't have to decipher all sorts of these different languages as you travel through Europe trying to trade or whatever it is you might be doing. If you can have a conversation with somebody, then you can tell them about Jesus and help Christianity grow and spread that way. During this time, and right when Jesus was crucified, something was going on in Rome called the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana means Roman peace. And the Romans had such a tight grip militarily on this area that no one really wanted to mess with Rome. Times were relatively safe. So it became a 207-year period, really from 27 BC to 180 AD, a 207-year period of peace and prosperity due to Roman control. And that allowed for free travel and trade. And so people wanted to move. They wanted to go see other people and trade and things like that, and of course bring ideas like Christianity with them. I mentioned this on the previous slide. The Roman gods and practices, such as emperor worship, weren't appealing anymore. One of the things people had to do was go to the temple, and there was temples all over the place, especially in the city of Rome, and they had to burn some incense and basically worship the current Roman emperor. Well, most people never met the emperor. There were a lot of really bad emperors who did nothing for the people. And so people kind of grew tired of this. They said, I want something better. These Roman gods and this Roman emperor, they're just not doing anything for me. So their minds were open to something new. It was kind of the right time, the right place for somebody like Jesus to come along. Well, there's a couple of Romans who do some really important things for Christianity. One of them is Roman Emperor Constantine. Basically, Constantine is battling for power within Rome, and he has a vision at night of the Christian symbol, and he wakes up the next morning and puts that symbol on all of his soldiers' shields, and goes into battle and he wins. And so he says, well, there must be something to this Christianity thing. So he decides to issue the Edict of Milan, which is also known as the Edict of Toleration, which declares Christianity a legal religion in 313. So that battle that he wins, which is called the Battle of Milvian Bridge, in a way brings Christianity to the attention of the Roman emperors. So Constantine does become emperor. I mean, that's the byproduct of that battle. And he decides to, across the most powerful empire in the world, make Christianity something people could do freely without the threat of persecution. He himself becomes a Christian much later on his deathbed. So some people say he's the first Roman Christian emperor, which is sort of true, but it's not like he himself embraces the religion right away. But he allows others to do so, and that's why the Edict of Toleration is such a big deal. It says now you can be Christian, and we're not going to take that away from you. Another emperor takes it even a step further. About 60 years later, Roman Emperor Theodosius recognized Christianity as the official religion of the empire. And so this is conversion by force, but what it does is it makes more and more people Christian. He says, you can't follow the Roman gods anymore. We are all going to be Christian. So now you're making millions of people Christians, which of course is going to make it spread very rapidly. So as we look at this unit, there's no doubt, and we're looking at the gifts of the Romans, spreading of Christianity is a really big deal. Whether you think that's a good or a bad thing is irrelevant. The point is the Romans helped make Christianity a much more accessible religion through some of these decisions by their emperors. So you can see from this map here, the really dark green areas are where Christianity was around 300. Again, the first 300 years of its existence, Christianity was illegal. Well, then right around 313 and into 380, when Theodosius and Constantine helped Christianity, all of a sudden it grows rapidly. So you can see everything in this lighter green becomes Christian, because this is the entire Roman Empire. So Christianity grows very quickly, certainly after that. Well, that's going to bring us to the development of Islam. And we're not going to dwell on this too much, but we have to give Islam its fair share of this story, because in the end, these two religions are going to fight each other. So the development of Islam is going to come a little bit after the year 600 with the story of Muhammad. And what you see here are the 5 pillars of Islam. These are very important cornerstones of Islam itself. The first one is there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. To pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. Have to give alms or give charity to the poor. Have to fast during the month of Ramadan, and make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in your life. Again, in your junior year, if you take world history, you're going to have to know all 5 of those. You'll learn those and study those. This is new to you. This is just sort of a cornerstone of what Muslims believe in. So let's take a look at sort of their background. We're gonna do this quite quickly. Islam developed out of the Arabian Peninsula. So it really developed out of the culture there, which was a Bedouin culture. It's the name of a group of traders, nomadic traders that lived there. So Islam developed out of the Arabian Bedouin culture around 600 AD. The Arabian Peninsula connected Asia, Europe, and Africa, which made it a crossroads for trade and the spread of ideas. It's kind of the perfect place for a new religion to grow if you want to look at spread of trade and spread of ideas, just like we did under Christianity. Well, if you're going to talk about the origin of Islam, you got to talk about Muhammad. Muhammad was a Bedouin trader. And he saw a vision of the angel Gabriel, who told him to spread the word of Islam. And the word of Islam really starts with the idea that there's one true God. That's really the origin story here, that all the other polytheistic gods that people were worshiping at the time were supposedly irrelevant, and that they needed to follow this one true God. And so Muhammad, he's not divine like Jesus. He's just a prophet. He's just a messenger, somebody who has something they want to tell people, and his job is to spread that idea, which of course again is the idea that there's one true God. So as mentioned, Muslims must follow the 5 pillars of Islam. I talked about that on one of the previous slides. Muslims follow the holy text called the Quran, and really the one version of the Quran that is supposedly the best, the one that you're supposed to read, is in Arabic. So translated versions are not supposed to be quite as good. They're not the true version. So in the Western world, you don't see a lot of people who speak Arabic. You don't see a lot of that in North, South America, or even Europe. So that's why you don't see a lot of Muslims in this area, or vice versa. You don't see a lot of Muslims here because Arabic and the Arabic culture did not spread to those parts of the world. Successors of Muhammad desired to spread Islam. They were called caliphs or caliphs, depending on your pronunciation. And there is a division with those successors. Some of them believe that Muhammad's bloodline should be the ones who carried on Islam. They became part of the Shiite branch of Islam. Those who don't adhere to that typically fall under the Sunni category. So just like you have different branches of Christianity, there are different branches of Islam. Now, Islamic armies swept through Arabia in areas without a state religion. So Islam grows a little bit more through the use of armies and empires, which is not something you typically see in Christianity. And people tend to think, well, that means Islam's a much more violent religion. Well, it's like, no, you just have to understand the culture of the time. The culture of the time was a little bit more fighter necessary, a little bit more warrior background. And so it's all about the culture in which it develops. And of course, it develops after the fall of Rome. So everywhere, even areas that are full of Christians, you see a lot of bloodshed and fighting going on. Many were attracted to Islam because it offered equality. Islamic law forbade conversion, so they didn't necessarily force you to be Muslim, is what I'm saying here. But what they could do is they say, if you don't become a Muslim, we're going to place higher taxes on you. So poor people that couldn't pay those taxes were, in a way, forced to become Muslim. But at least they weren't, a sword wasn't put up to their throat and say, you have to become a Muslim or we're going to cut your head off. Because Islamic law does not allow for that. So here you can see Islam developed right here in Mecca and Medina. Mecca is the most holy city for Islam even today, and it's spread, and it's taken over a good part of North Africa, which was once part of the Roman Empire, which was once Christian, and has spread to the Middle East, where you see it dominate there today, Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. These are the areas that are very heavy in Islamic population even in the world today. So that brings us to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is right in the heart of all this. I'm going to go back to the map here. Jerusalem is right here. Jerusalem was a Roman city. It was Christian at one point, but you can see Islam's going to spread right up in that region. And Jerusalem's just heavy in history. So it's a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And let's talk why. For Jews, it's the site of the Western Wailing Walls, which you see here from this arrow. It's the last remaining remnant of the ancient temple that was destroyed by the Romans. The Jews had several temples in Jerusalem. They think this was where Jews believe where God lived. It was such a holy site. The Romans destroyed it and pulled it down. So what you have here is just one piece of it left. So historically, very, very important for the Jews. So here's what they think the Jewish temple looked like before the Romans destroyed it. Here's another picture of what Jews do today. And Jerusalem's in the heart of Israel, which is a very, very Jewish country. The Jews come to this wall and they write little prayers and they stick it in the cracks of that wall. So that's what you see going on here. For Christians, Jerusalem is where Jesus was crucified on the hill of Calvary. And so it's very, very holy for Christians. It's also the home of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is a site where Jesus was crucified as well as the place he was buried. So very, very holy site for Christians. For Muslims, you have the Dome of the Rock, which is also built right on the site of the Western Wailing Wall, the Jewish temple. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is where Muhammad arose into heaven. And it's built on top of the ruins of that Jewish temple. So you've got three religions that really, really have historic ties to Jerusalem. Well, that brings us to conflict. People want control of this city. So as both Christianity and Islam grew, Jerusalem and its surrounding lands, also known as the Holy Lands, became a religious prize worth fighting and killing for. And this is going to lead to the Crusades. Well, like I said, in this class we're not going to necessarily go into detail on the Crusades because you learn that in world history. Although you did read that article, that short article on what the Crusades were, so you should have a working background on what the Crusades were. But in a nutshell, they're holy wars waged by Pope Urban II on the behalf of Christianity to reclaim Jerusalem and the Holy Lands for Christianity. Basically, they want to have control of the city, and Pope Urban offers a free ticket to heaven for those who go on crusade, especially if you die on crusade. And it says it's okay to kill infidels or non-believers. So Christians kill Jews, they kill Muslims, trying to get the city back. And in the first crusade, they succeed in capturing Jerusalem. It's a violation of thou shalt not kill. It's a huge Christian contradiction. Yet many people took up the sword and listened to Pope Urban and went and fought for Jerusalem. So it led to the Crusades and our next film that we're going to watch in this class, which really sets up the Second Crusade. Kingdom of Heaven is all about how the Christians lose Jerusalem to the Muslims after they were successful in the First Crusade. So we've got a working background now of the information we need to see that film. We know how Christians and Muslims developed. We know how their religions spread. And now we know that Jerusalem is a prize that 3 different religions definitely have huge ties to. So this gives us a perfect working background for our film. So that's going to bring us back to our learning targets. Questions say, describe how Jerusalem was and still is an important religious city, and compare and contrast the development of Christianity and Islam. And I think with the information we have, we can go ahead and answer those questions and we'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and cue up Kingdom of Heaven as our next film. Hope you learned something here today. We'll see you next time.